everybody, and welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
I'm Albert Berg, and the bad idea for this week takes place in Australia, Tony.
It's just a bad idea in general. Don't get Joe started on this one. He will tell you why Australia is the worst idea.
We may cover that one day, but today it is beyond the scope of our podcast to cover the entirety of the bad ideas that are Australia. However, we are going to go back to the early 1800s, and some people who were settling in Australia managed to find themselves in a place that they ended up calling Eden. And Eden was on the coast. And specifically, it was situated on the shores of a body of water called Twofold Bay. Twofold Bay was frequented by many pods of whales at the time. And you may be aware, if you've read Moby Dick or you're familiar with the history of energy in the world, that whales were very valuable because you could use their oil to make light with your lamps. And so people were hunting them and harvesting them and scooping up this oil out of their heads to be able to make fuel out of. And if you're familiar with whaling at all, you're probably familiar with the image conjured up in Moby Dick of these big whaling vessels going out into the open ocean, chasing down these whales, sending out rowboats after them, throwing harpoons at them, bringing the whale back to the boat, and this huge ordeal that you would have to do to get a few whales back for their fuel to the shore. But there was another way to do it, if you could. If the whales were close enough to the shore, you could do something called shore whaling. And the way shore whaling would work, you would drive whales that were already close to the shore up onto the beach and kill them on the beach, or kill them very close to the beach and drag their carcasses up onto the shore. It was a much less labor-intensive operation than sending out an entire ship. You could just use the small boats and herd these whales up and be able to get them from relatively easy distance.
Sounds like it'd be pretty effective for not having a giant ship.
And well, this was how whaling was done originally. The giant ships came later when whales became much more scarce, but over here in Australia, the whales hadn't been hunted nearly as heavily as they had in the other parts of the world, so there were still quite a few of them in the harbor. And in 1828, a man named John Rain established a formal whaling operation in the bay. And interestingly enough, his operation used the Aboriginal people from around this area. They were called the Thaua, is how I'm going to try to pronounce it, based on how it's written. This was a tribe that had lived in this area for a long time, and they had developed a very close, sort of naturalistic, semi-spiritual relationship with the whales. They were already used to using these whale carcasses, and one of the interesting sidebars that I noted when I was reading up on this story was they refused to kill the orcas that ran alongside the whales, and instead of sort of forcing the issue, the white guy said, okay, you can avoid killing the orcas, and they ended up using these orcas to help them herd the sperm whales into the dangerous spots where they could kill them. And then the orcas would get like the leftover bits, like the lips and the fins and stuff, to eat. So they kind of formed a symbiotic relationship as they were hunting whales. It has nothing to do with the bad idea. I just thought that was a really cool fact. Tony.
It's particularly interesting that they're just teaming up with what most people consider to be the planet's apex predator.
Yeah, the orcas helped us out. So that was pretty neat. And they go on with this whaling for most of the 1800s. There's a little town that pops up here. And, you know, they do the regular stuff that people of the time would do with whale carcasses until 1896. And in 1896, we get the first inklings of this weird story circulating out into the world. And here's the kernel of the story. So this man who had suffered from severe rheumatism his entire life, and rheumatism is like arthritis, essentially. It covers a lot of different types of aches and pains, but essentially, if you think arthritis, you're probably thinking of what they were thinking when they said rheumatism. This guy is walking out on the beach with his friends, and there's a whale carcass on the beach because this is a whaling town, and there just would be whale carcasses on the beach. There are some accounts that say this guy was just being a goofball, but I tend to believe the ones that say he was drunk. Regardless of the exact reason, somehow this dude ends up inside this rotting whale carcass. And his friends who are with him at first are freaked out by this. They try to pull him out. The stench is so bad from this rotting whale that they just can't. They just have to back up and say, gee, I hope our friend can make it out okay. And 2 hours later, this guy finally crawls out. He claws his way free from the rotting blubber, apparently none the worse for wear other than smelling like rotten whale meat, and tells his friends that there has been a miracle. And the miracle is not just that he has survived the inside of a rotting whale carcass. It is that his rheumatism has been completely cured.
That's just bizarre. Those anti-inflammatory effects from whales, it's going to be a new thing.
It was a new thing. I was able to find some interesting information about where this idea might have come from. And while the sort of papers that covered this idea at the time talked about this specific incident, it's probable that the idea was in the air from the Aboriginal people that lived there originally, because they already had this very close relationship with the whales. They were already using them for all kinds of things. They used their bones to make their houses. They would eat pieces of the meat. Probably they were doing this kind of cure ahead of time, and the white guys just kind of picked up on it and said, we have this new thing now. I don't have documentation for that in depth, but that seems like a real good possibility to me. But regardless of exactly the origin of this, it starts to catch on. Now, it doesn't catch on huge. I don't want to overestimate and say that like millions of people started flocking to Eden to experience the whale cure. But there were people who decided, hey, I'm hurting real bad. You know what I would like to do, in addition to hurting real bad, is bury myself in a whale for up to 30 hours and let it rot around me.
Just get right up in that warm, disgusting whale womb and let the juices soak in.
Yes, and I want to say the number again, 30 hours. This is how much time was prescribed. Now, granted, the original dude fell in for only 2 hours, but apparently doctors thought that was not enough. If you wanted as much as two years worth of cure for your rheumatism, you had to stay in this whale for a while.
People were a lot more patient back then. I mean, they didn't even have like Game of Thrones on their phone to watch while they're sitting inside of a carcass. That's how we do it today.
This is how the cure was described in the July 1902 edition of the Medical Examiner. Quote, "The whale had been dead about 40 hours and had started to decompose. And the whole time we were sitting and standing there, great blasts of gas and horrible bubbles would gush out around us and make our hair stand on end." The imagery in those words alone of this whale violently and gaseously decomposing just really paints a picture for you of what these people were going through to get rid of their rheumatism. And it's not like this was just some crackpot thing that a couple of guys believed in and like everybody else thought was stupid. It cropped up in a number of medical journals that apparently thought it was a credible approach to curing the disease, with similar merit to something like a hot box or a sauna. They thought that the heat of the decomposition of the whale and possibly some aspect of these gross gases was having some positive effect on these patients. And I was able to find original prints of several of these journals that published, hey, down there in Australia, they're doing this thing and it's really working. The only reason we don't do it in America is because we killed all our whales already. Not a direct quote, but that basically...
I mean, it's probably pretty close. If only we had more whales.
The treatment might have spread to other places, but it was the most popular in its birthplace, Eden, Australia. And it was so successful that Eden became something of a destination for rheumatism sufferers. Hotels near the beach became high-value property, and the way this worked was you had rheumatism, you heard about the whale cure, so you went to Eden, Australia, and you got yourself a hotel by the beach. And you would sit there and you would wait until some fishermen beached a whale. And then you'd go down to the beach and say, "Hey, dude, can we get inside your whale?" To which the fisherman would say, a part of me wants to assume that he's like trying not to laugh at these guys. Says, "Sure, let me cut some holes for you." According to the sources I read, they did not. It was a free service because the fishermen just wanted the oil. They didn't care about these idiots sitting there in the rot. Unfortunately,
it's just weird.
It was very weird. Illustrations of the time show a number of people inside one whale too. I've included in this document that you can see, but no one else can, Tony. At the bottom of the document here, you can see this sort of garden of people planted inside various holes in this large whale, sort of tucked into the whale at various levels. There's a little insert where there's a dude who's checking out another, like a lady who's sitting next to him in the whale, and his wife spies him through the telescope and gets real mad. It might be slightly satirical, but it's apparently a depiction of how this actually worked. There are also pictures of people actually doing this. This is a real thing that at least some people did. And it might have continued longer if the whale trade had not sort of been coming to an end. Despite the fact that there were more of these whales in Australia, they killed enough of them where it became untenable. And by 1920, the whaling operation in Eden closed down for good. And with it, the chance to sit in a rotting whale corpse for 30 hours was lost to the world forever.
I mean, you could probably still do that today if you were very, very ambitious and knew where they were going to wash up. Like, it seems like it's plausible, but I wonder if there's anyone that today wants to try it for their rheumatism.
I keep thinking about how bad it must have to hurt for you to want to do this. They described the method in one of my quotes that I believe I forgot to put in this paper, Tony, but they talked about how in order to do it right, you would bury someone up to their neck in the entrails of the whale, and then you would try to make sure that as much of the whale's skin would seal around their neck, because the escaping gases were so noxious that it would make them sick. So you wanted to keep those gases in as much as possible. Also for the obvious benefit of your rheumatism, Tony. If you're letting those gases out, that's not helping your rheumatism at all.
Yeah, you gotta let those gases seep into you.
I hope I don't have to explain in detail why this is a bad idea. It's a bad idea because you're sitting inside of a rotting animal carcass for your disease. It didn't work. It wasn't good, but it was good for Eden there at least. So that's nice, I guess. They had a little bit of a tourist economy, medical tourism coming in.
It terrifies me and makes me happy at the same time that this is a thing. I don't know what to think about it other than that. Like, this is a perfectly bad idea. Possibly the most we've had on here in a while.
It's so much fun to think about. And I don't want to rag on the people who tried it too much because they didn't have like anything else either. Medicine just sort of sucked back then. It's not their fault they were willing to try new things. But I'm glad we have, real medicine now, Tony. As always, we appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much. If you have bad ideas you want to cover, you can send them to us on Twitter at Human Echoes or over on Gmail at badideashow@gmail.com. You can also support this show on Patreon and help us produce even more coverage of more bad ideas.
And as you can tell, we like the really silly, weird bad ideas too. So, like, anything that you guys are thinking about, please send those to the email. We will talk to you here next week with another bad idea.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.